Okay, let me just introduce Ingo and you and the panel in a second. Ingo is our moderator. Thank you, Ingo, for putting together this great panel. Thanks also to the panelists to come on board in such a short notice. Ingo will moderate the National Licensing and Space Insurance panel, and he's a lawyer and a partner at BHO Legal in Germany. And thank you for your availability and expertise in this situation. I'm going to now leave you to manage the next panel. Thank you. Bye.
Yes, many thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are, or good morning, or good evening, whatever it is. Welcome to our session 10 on national licensing and space insurance. Yeah, as Tony just said, we have a big and amazing panel. With all together Jörn Spurmann from the Rocket Factory Augsburg, Stephen Plant and Leanne Chhen from the UK Space Agency, Akiko Hama from Global Aerospace, Morten Pahle from Volante, and Cécile Gaubert from her own law firm. Welcome and many thanks for participating to all of you. Yeah, just starting in order not to lose time, a few slides just introducing to the topic from my side, and then every panelist also has a short moment to present himself, his organization, and some key thoughts, and then we directly move into the discussion. Yes, so here it is. Can everybody see it like this? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just a few thoughts on national licensing and space insurance. Yeah, new space is challenging the traditional approaches on national licensing and mainly the requirements regarding third-party liability, TPL, space insurance. We see many new players, including many startups without extensive credentials. We see a lot and very varied technologies and new applications, new type of launchers, on-orbit servicing, active debris removal, lunar activities, space resource exploitation, etc., etc. We see also increasing risks in orbit, conjunctions, collisions, at least in most used orbits, but also increasingly MEO, GEO, and overall fast technology advancement and a very agile and competitive market development. The regulatory landscape is reacting. We see many emerging space nations with new national space laws. Few have come already, others are in the making, whereby the leading space countries, which had already national space legislation, were, are, or will be soon in a process of reviewing, reforming, amending the national space laws. So a lot is going on, a lot is on the move. All that happens in an increased regulatory competition among countries to attract companies or to keep them, to ensure growth, competitiveness, and with all these new laws and new countries with laws, we also see an increasing divergency with different philosophies, approaches, also definitions, and concepts in details. Just a few years back, there was a study for the European Commission analyzing, comparing national space legislation. It already showed quite varying approaches to liability obligations and liability caps, and the related insurance requirements. This is the table here, where you see basically a range from something like 20 million as a minimum up to, let's say, several hundred million, and quite a diversity. However, even with these divergences, the landscape was rather stable. Of course, there were amendments, but in rather long periods, and only few national space legislations, and the overall focus was on traditional geo communication satellites and few established launchers. It was quite understandable, and also the insurance sector was well prepared to cope with it. Now, we see that in many of the new laws and also the regulatory practices, we see a move from fixed liability caps more to case-by-case decisions, which on the one hand is a good sign. It enables a more targeted, tailored approach for small satellites, for constellations, for varying things. On the other hand, it reduces also the predictability. Sometimes the decision on the liability obligations may come in the very end of the licensing process. Every legislator, every regulator, when establishing the law or the regulatory practice, of course, need to take into account what the space insurance sector can really offer. And in this regard, we have to state that overall, the space insurance market remains small and volatile. Over the last years, space insurers suffered losses. Premiums were low. Efforts were rising due to new applications, new operators, new technologies, etc., etc. And at least a few insurers even either stepped totally out of the market or limited their engagement over the last year. For some new types of activities, like on-orbit servicing, active debris removal, adequate insurance products are still in the making. And also for constellations, while there are already some solutions, let's say the insurance market products are not yet fully established. All these new launchers, launch sites, other activities, they require more intensive risk assessment, thereby also increasing the effort and potentially also the duration needed. On the other hand, as already said, the case-by-case decisions by regulatory bodies demand a more flexible and agile process. So far from my side on the introduction, and I now hand over to the first panelist, Jörn Spurmann from Rocket Factory Augsburg.
Thank you, Ingo. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation and for organizing all of it and the nice intro slides. Really good. Quick words on me. I'm Jörn Spurmann. I'm one of the 2 executive board members here at Rocket Factory. What are we doing here at Rocket Factory? You can see it a bit in the back. So we just moved to a new 5,000 square meters facility. And what you see in here, we are manufacturing launch vehicles, right? That's what we're up to. So we fit quite perfectly in that panel and in that discussion of today, because for launch, you need a spaceport, you need launch licenses, and you need all sorts of activities in terms of insurance that you need to get coverage for running your business in the long run. And I'm really looking forward and being excited to the discussion that we're going to have here today.
Thanks a lot, Jörn. Now, Stephen from UK Space Agency.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Ingo, for that introduction. So a bit about myself, and Lee and I are going to do a 10-minute slot for the presentation to give you a bit of background in terms of UK legislation for regulating spaceflight activities, and also how we're looking to about the licensing regime as well that we're proposing to apply under the new legislation. And also Lee will talk a bit about orbital operations, and I'll talk a bit about liabilities and insurance requirements here in the UK. So Lee, if you're able to introduce yourself and put up the presentation, please, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. My name is Lee, or Leanne, and I work in Orbital Operations, setting up the regulatory framework for regulating satellites from the UK. So we've already been regulating satellites operated by UK nationals outside of the UK, and for the first time we'll also be doing that from the UK. So that's been my responsibility. So as Steve mentioned, we have our slide pack that we can share with you now to present the legislation that we now have, well, the draft of, and we'll soon have up and running. Steve, did you want to share the screen?
Oops, where did I put the presentation? Right, just bear with me 1 second. I should just bring this up. And hopefully you'll be able to see this. Just trying to find the right button there. Here we go. Right, hopefully it's be coming up. Share. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
So as Lee said, I'll just move on to the second slide. Hopefully you'll be able to all see this. So as he said, currently we license spaceflight activities in the UK, but it's done so under the Outer Space Act. So this is for UK entities that are looking to operate satellites from the UK, and also those launches take place from abroad. And so as the UK wishes to engage in launch activity now as well, given the advancements in the sector, we looked at whether the Outer Space Treaty was, the Outer Space Act was still appropriate to enable that, and we decided that it wasn't. So therefore, we developed a new piece of legislation called the Space Industry Act, which is designed not only to cater for the current approach to licensing activity for satellites, but also to enable launch capability as well. And so this was introduced in 2018, and it's a bit of landmark legislation for ourselves, and really does set the overarching framework to enable a diverse range of activities to be able to take place from the UK in terms of different types of launch operation. So this is really sort of a major benchmark. So the Space Industry Act will regulate spaceflight activities that take place from the UK. So that would be launch and the operation of satellites, whereas in future, launches of satellites and also operation of satellites from overseas will take place, will be licensed under the Outer Space Act, and Lee will go into a bit more detail about that in a bit later on. But one of the key things that in terms of designing the legislative framework is we have the Space Industry Act, which sets the overarching framework and all the high level rules and that we'll need to follow with respect to licensing and regulating spaceflight activity in the UK. There is then a secondary level of legislation that we're about to introduce into Parliament. We hope to be in place by the summer, fully passed, which sets out some more detailed regulations on a wide variety of different topics. And then the legislation is then supported by supplementary guidance as well, to provide further background and advice in terms of how to comply with the regulations, and also things that the regulator will be looking at as well. So we have these three tiers we've set up. Lee, do you want to look at the license types, please?
Yes, thank you. So these are the license types that are available under the Space Industry Act. As we mentioned, we already license satellites, so that falls under Orbital Operation licenses. And we'll continue to license those as well, both overseas and in the UK. So the new license types are launch operator. So that's for operating launch vehicles, both ones that go into orbit as well as suborbital. We also have return operator licenses. So that's kind of an interesting one in terms of launches that took place outside of the UK, and then they wish to return the launch vehicle to UK territory. So we've got that license type as well. There's also spaceports. So that's both horizontal and vertical spaceport licenses. And lastly, we have range control, which is often not usually a commercial thing. It is usually often a government activity, but we are enabling range commercial operations as well from the UK. Next slide, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Currently, the UK Space Agency is the regulatory and licensing authority for licenses that are issued under the Outer Space Act. However, with the advent of the Space Industry Act, there will be a new regulator appointed under the Act, and this is the Civil Aviation Authority, which has a sort of very long established regulatory function within the UK and is globally recognised and respected for its activities in the aviation area. And the reason for that is that within the UK, owing to previous incident called the Piper Alpha disaster, there was a decision taken to separate the safety function away from the promotion role within government. So the CAA will be appointed as the independent regulator. So this will be the CAA will start operations once the Space Industry Act has been commenced and the new regulations are in place. So again, looking at this to take place by the summer, and at which point the CAA will then be able to accept license applications, both under the Space Industry Act, but also under the Outer Space Act as well. So the CAA will regulate the activities related to both satellite licensing and also launch licensing as well. So all of the licensing and regulatory activity under those two acts will be taking place by the CAA. So the existing staff who work in the UK Space Agency will be transferring over to the CAA. So they'll have that existing regulatory experience transferred over as well. And there's also a lot of development of the new regulator ongoing at the moment in terms of staffing, training, and developing that expertise, and lots of engagement with other regulators as well. Elise, if you've gone to the next slide about the licensing approach.
Thanks, Steve. This is broadly the licensing approach that we will be taking under the Space Industry Act, which is based on what we currently already do under the Outer Space Act for orbital licenses. So you'll see Block 1 is, or Block I, is the pre-application meeting. So this is before the application, the formal application process starts. The regulator will meet with any applicants on an optional basis if they want to discuss their application. We find this to be a very useful meeting both for the regulator and for applicants, so that applicants can discuss their mission, their mission plans, and the regulator can often give an indication as to potential concerns that they might have and things that the applicant might wish to address before they actually do formally submit the application. Then the formal application process starts with the application being submitted, and the regulator then assesses the application, which includes the technical assessments as well as financial, and whether the applicant and the relevant officers are fit and proper persons to undertake the activities that will be licensed by the license. And then the regulator will then make a decision either way, whether they decide to issue a license or not. And also they will consult with their statutory consultees, which includes the Secretary of State, and also health and safety authorities, etc. Once the license is granted, there's monitoring and oversight that continues to take place so that the UK continues to oversee the activities of license activities as per our international obligations to continue supervising space activities. And we also might require, for example, annual health checks to see how the operations are continuing, and whether there are any kind of issues or material changes as the years go by. We have found this to be a very good way of conducting applications, and that's why we're continuing to do this under the Space Industry Act. Steve, next slide. Oh, that's me as well. Okay, so orbital operations is my area of expertise, I suppose, in terms of licensing them. And as already mentioned, we already do that under the Outer Space Act, and we'll continue to do that under the Space Industry Act. Orbital operations are regulated, or will be regulated in a different way to the other license types, which, as a reminder, are launch operator, return operator, spaceports, and range. And the reason for that is because of the wide diversity in terms of mission profiles for orbital operations. So you might have missions that range from a CubeSat operated by a university to large constellations to in-orbit servicing missions, active debris removal, lunar missions. So all of these are covered by orbital operations. And as a result, we need to be able to have some flexibility in terms of how we regulate those, which means that we are less prescriptive in terms of how we regulate, and we tend to talk to applicants about their mission and ask for more information. So it's quite an iterative process. And then once if we are satisfied that they've addressed our concerns and they'll be safe enough, we then will issue a license. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Lee. So moving on to the issue of insurance and liabilities, which is obviously as operators, etc., you'll understand it, key issues for the sector. Was very keenly debated during the passage of the space industry bill through Parliament. So in terms of turning to launch first, what we're going to be implementing in the UK is what we're calling a modelled insurance requirement, which is essentially the same sort of approach as is applied in the US for calculating insurance for launch vehicles. So we'll be setting the insurance requirement based on the specifics of each launch vehicle, the launch site, etc. And we're calling it the modelled insurance requirement because we're not using the term MPL because there are some specific differences with relation to the UK approach we're adopting, primarily around the financial values that we're applying for deaths and injuries for modelling purposes and setting the insurance requirement. So the way we're developing the insurance amounts for this is really in keeping with the overall approach we're using for the Space Industry Act generally, in terms of being able to maintain flexibility to accommodate various types of launch, to recognise differences and therefore reflect the insurance amounts as a result. And in terms of the limits of liability for operators, we would be looking to set on a generally the limit of liability at the same amount as that modelled insurance requirement for launch. So for in-orbit activities, there is currently already under the Outer Space Act an established liability and insurance requirement regime, and we're looking to continue that under the Space Industry Act. So for standard missions, there will be a requirement of 60 million euros of insurance and a limit of liability as well for satellite missions. That can be raised if the mission is considered to be high risk on the basis of a risk assessment. And there are also options for waiving the insurance under specific circumstances as well, where for the lowest risk categories of satellites as well, under specific conditions. In terms of operator limits of liability, as we are looking to implement a policy of limiting operator liability in operator licenses with regards to liabilities that arise under the Act. So operators won't be facing unlimited liability, and that was a key concern that was raised during the passage of the bill through Parliament. So the space industry regulations that we're bringing through Parliament into Parliament shortly will then provide us with all the framework we need to implement our approach on limiting operator liability. And with regards to insurance requirements, we'll be setting those out as license conditions, so very much in the same way as happens under the Outer Space Act already. So there will be regulations on that. So we can detail these further within the license. So I think that was what I wanted to mention there in terms of the background on the licensing regime, etc. So Ingo, back to you.
Yeah, Stephen, Leanne, many thanks for this detailed first insight. I think we will have a lot of questions and discussions. First comments already in the Q&A, but we will take them up a bit later. First, continuing with the introduction. Moving now to Akiko Hama from Global Aerospace.
Thank you, Ingo, and thank you very much to Access Space Alliance for having me join this panel today. I'm Akiko Hama, and I'm an underwriter at Global Aerospace, and we are a specialist underwriting agency focusing on all matters related to aviation and aerospace insurance. And we're very much a leading market in the field. Obviously, space is part of what we do. And within Global, we offer both hull all risks, so first-party asset policies for space, but also we underwrite third-party liability coverage as well in space for the space industry. I have put together just a few thoughts and pointers on insurance. So I will try and share my screen. I've not done this on Zoom before. Now, can people see my screen?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Really, just as an introduction, just to say, insurance has always been a key enabler of many space projects, and as Stuart Martin on the previous panel alluded to, it does encourage business confidence, and it may be a requirement by the financiers, and there are regulatory requirements associated in respect of third-party liability. So we have always been, you know, part of the industry. And again, as Stuart also alluded to, the fact there are many more commercial missions than we have ever seen, and including government missions, as again Martin had mentioned. And you know, it seems to be the way of, you know, what's going on now, that actually a lot of governments are no longer procuring their own hardware. They are procuring services from commercial entities, which means commercial entities have to bear more risk. And I think, you know, as that trend goes on, I think industry will seek more coverage from the insurance market. So just briefly, where does insurance lie in a space project? Well, I think risk management is an integral part of any project, let alone, you know, risky business like space. And insurance should be at the forefront of any discussions right from the start. And, you know, right from even before procurement contracts are signed, really. And this also applies to governments and regulators putting in place legislations, regulations, and, you know, there's no point a regulator setting an insurance requirement if then the commercial entity can't go and buy that coverage that is required by them. So I think it is important that, you know, insurance industry are involved in the discussions right from the start of any project or any regulatory processes. And really the key takeaway from here is insurance should never be an afterthought. And we have had in industry where, you know, operators might have come to us almost a bit too late and either haven't been able to procure insurance they needed or possibly have to pay a high price for it. So I think that should be at the forefront of any startup's minds about risk management and insurance. And you can get advice from specialist space insurance brokers and any specialist space lawyers and other specialist advisors in the field. And just a few notes on insurance also. Insurance market is a dynamic market, and like any other market, it's a simple supply and demand model. And the availability and affordability will very much depend on the specific risk itself, but also what's the current market environment. There are certain conditions that do come with policies do come with certain standard conditions, including exclusions. But I've noted due diligence here because this is a clause that we do rely on as insurance markets when we are underwriting risk, that the insured must mitigate all risk as far as possible. You know, they should minimize loss where as far as possible, and that act at all times as uninsured. And that is a precedent. That is very much a condition of a standard condition of insurance policies. Contractual cross waivers and hold harmless agreements. These are specific to space contracts. These are specific language in space contracts, which I'm sure Cécile will be able to elaborate more on. And this really is very much the case for the third-party liability policy requirements. So that's all I wanted to touch on for now. So I'll pass you back to Ingo.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Akiko, for these first important thoughts. Morten, do you want to continue, please?
I'm not sure whether I can continue, but I'm happy to take the microphone a little bit and also say some words. So I'll try to share my screen as well, and I hope that works. So
yes.
The key question, so yeah, so my name is Morten Pahle. I'm the Managing Director of Aerospace, which is part of the Volante group of companies. So we provide space insurance from us, similar to Akiko. We provide launch and others, and I'll go into that later. But I think this one, so the key question is sort of what does space insurance really do for us? And I think it's easy to get a little bit sidetracked because unfortunately, there is a lot of noise around TPL and requirements that are imposed on operators to obtain the licenses. And I think that it's an obligation, and the value of that isn't necessarily recognized. But what it also does is it takes away the focus from what insurance really should be doing, which is to support startups and companies that are not no longer startups as well, for that matter, to fulfill their business plan. So just wanted to put some really brief numbers on that as well. Since 1995, and this goes back to what Akiko mentioned earlier, I mean, space insurance has been supporting the space industry for a long, long time. So since 1995, and in fact, we can go back before that as well, but for the last 25 years, we've been insuring about 1,400 launches in total. We've been insuring about 15,000 satellite years in orbit since that. And over the last 5 years, for instance, that's about 400 launch satellites that we have insured as a market. Over that period, we paid claims, about 230 claims for a total value of $15 billion US dollars. And again, over the last 5 years, we've had about 16 claims. I'm ignoring some smaller ones here, for $1.8 billion. And of course, we also get paid for that. So if you compare the total claims paid with the total premium that we've received over the last 25 years, then it's clear that on paper, insurers are making a bit of profit. But that goes up and down with actual claims and results. In any given year, insurers can lose money and make money. And as Akiko mentioned earlier, it's a very dynamic market. We do insure, I'd say, almost everything that goes up there in theory. So in the very early days, telecom satellites were the only commercial satellites, and they were the only ones that therefore were insured. Nowadays, I think we have seen almost the whole broad spectrum, from science satellites to crewed missions, debris removal missions. This year, we were insuring mission extensions. There's 2 commercial ones up there. Both of those are insured on the market. I think insurance, the standard insurance product, is extremely flexible and extremely adapted to clients. And both the underwriters, so Akiko and myself, and also the brokers are showing a decent amount of adaptation of what is really quite a standard product and has been very standard for the last 25 years. However, there is a big and an increasingly beginning, if you want, increasing gap between the number of launches and the number of insured launches. And as we see it, there is a coverage gap in that. There appears to be many more risks being taken by the space industry today, which are uninsured, than there were earlier. So to go back to sort of what should space insurance do for us instead of just what has space insurance done for us. I'm a space insurer, not a graphic designer, so I hope you can excuse my sort of drawings, but I'm trying to indicate the life cycle of a typical satellite. As it's being assembled, integrated, and tested, it's being shipped to the launch site. It has a pre-launch exposure, then it's launched, and then hopefully it is in orbit for 5, 10, or 15 years. So traditional space insurance only covers the two aspects of launch and in orbit. Very few insurers cover the whole range. So assembly, integration, testing, of course, is insurable, but it's not typically seen as space insurance. Transit and pre-launch, for reasons best known to the insurance market, pre-launch is placed on the marine cargo market and is not underwritten typically by space insurers. And then the dreaded third-party liability, again, is not provided by traditional space insurers. It's underwritten by insurers who really ultimately have it as part of an aviation portfolio, and it is seen as an aviation liability risk or as something linked to aviation liability risk. So all those are big red circles. And then, of course, what I think is often also very important, especially for startups, so what I call the associated risks. So risks which are related to business interruption, which can come from various aspects of young technology being developed, or specific to space, a launch delay, which can be caused by co-passengers or the launcher itself. Things like engine testing, license withdrawal when it comes to export licenses. All those are risks which are quite, or can be quite significant to space operators, and they're not typically a risk which is insured, although it may sometimes be insurable. And I think this is where I think both insurance brokers and also insurance underwriters, we have a bigger role to play than we do today to develop our products to provide coverage for this, because I think those are risks that businesses face. And that we may be in a better position to mitigate than they may be themselves. So, and again, I'm probably repeating some of the other things being said here. So the role of space insurance, clearly we should support space industry by taking on those risks which the operators, the manufacturers, etc., cannot retain themselves. But insurance should be a bit more than that, and it should be thought of as a supporting tool for the entire business plan. Some businesses can be more successful if they can accept more risks contractually, for instance, or a higher risk on their schedule. And if they can find a way of protecting those risks behind the scenes, so to speak, that they can be more commercially viable without actually having a higher retained risk profile. They can maybe produce higher profit margins. And also by being properly insured and protected, you increase your business plan's chances of survival, which should make you more attractive as an investment object. So there's reasons to look at risk mitigation, and insurance is one of those tools. From the day you start looking at setting up a company and throughout your missions. And of course, insurance should be easy to understand, easy to buy, and easy to manage, and that's also something that both underwriters and brokers can work on. And I think especially if we're looking at the new space entrants who may not have the experience that SES and Intelsat have, and some of the ways the insurance market works isn't always very obvious to outstander. So it's important for us to attend conferences like this, for instance, to be able to sort of explain and listen to and understand what potential clients need and how we can help them. So finally, just a really quick plug before we go to discussion. So at Volante, we've created something called the Bifrost facility. Bifrost used to be the rainbow that connected the gods with the humans, so space with the ground. And it's a facility we've put together that should help by combining all those potential coverages: AIT, transit, pre-launch, launch, deorbit, in-orbit, and third-party liability where required, but under a package which makes it simple to manage, simple to administer. It should also give cost benefits because it groups things together, and it's a way for us to engage and get to really understand the clients, so that there is a trust level and a sharing of aligned interests over time. So I'll just leave that and I look forward to the discussion that's coming. Thank you, Ingo.
Yeah, many thanks, Morten. Hopefully hearing more later on this Bifrost. Yeah, and last but not least, Cécile Gaubert from France. Nice to see you, Cécile.
Okay, thank you, Ingo. Nice to see you. I'm very happy. Thank you, Ingo, and thank you, Access Space, for organizing this conference, and more particularly this panel. As Ingo said, I am a lawyer. I am a space lawyer, and Ingo mentioned it, but I am registered in France because I'm French. So I'm pretty sure you did not notice that with my because of my beautiful English accent. But so I'm registered and practicing in France. And there are now more than 2 decades that I'm working within the space sector. First at ESA, and then within an insurance broker for quite a long time. So I have a quite good insight of space insurance, and then now within my law firm. What I try to do is to share my screen. Do you see it?
Yes.
Yes, very good. I only have 2 slides because I don't want you to say that lawyers are talking too much. So just quick words first, because I know that for some of you, you may ask what a space lawyer can do within space activities, and I know also that we are sometimes seen as some sort of blocking points or people that jeopardize projects because of legal issues. But we can have some input, especially on the legal analysis that can be performed, particularly when talking about new space, because there are new activities that Ingo detailed a bit earlier, with new legal issues. And those legal analyses may help us to understand the legal environment and what is authorized or not, or where the gray zones are, because we have some gray zones. But the lawyer is also a contract advisory, so it can help its client to review its contract and to check whether the contract is well balanced. Of course, if the contract is legally valid, but also to verify that the interests of the client are properly assessed. And hopefully not, because no one wants to face litigation and to go in front of courts, but the lawyer is there to represent the client in front of jurisdiction, or to support its client with mediation or arbitration proceedings. But this being said, I just want to highlight three points for our discussion later on. Is that, well, insurance is not a single topic as such. It has to be seen, it has to be analyzed with some other topics, which are briefly, first, obviously, the legal environment. So it is very obvious based on the title of this panel, but the legal environment is very important, as it set up the liability frame, which is more than important when talking about insurance. Without liability, there is no insurance, of course. But also the legal environment will, for some laws and some national space laws, will provide insurance provisions, specific insurance provisions, which might be the amount of insurance, but also the obligation. Well, first the obligation of an insurance, then the amount of insurance, and for some of the law, additional conditions applicable to those insurances. So insurance is to be seen, viewed along with the legal environment, but also along with the contracts. And the contractual part is quite important, because a party to a contract should not increase its liability or its responsibility, as it may have some impact on the insurers afterward, because the insurers, they will bear the same liability than the one bird by it's insured. So it is quite important to review as well the contracts on how the liability and the insurance provisions are drafted. And the last item I wanted to highlight, and Akiko said a few words on it earlier, it's about the contractual practices, because under the space sector, there is a specific contract practice environment where we have usually, and I say usually, not all the time, but usually a cross waiver of liability between parties and hold harmless clauses, which are a specific provision that allocate the liability. And I briefly summarize the process, but at the end, with those provisions, the liability will be borne by one entity, which is usually the launching agency operator or the satellite operator. It depends on the phases we are. And it is very important to look at those practices and to be sure that they are really integrated in the contract, as it will also have an impact on the insurance. So just to say, I know that when we are discussing about a contract or a new project, insurance comes not often, but not all the time, but often at the end of the discussion. But it is a real point of attention that has to be seen in light of other topics. And I'm really keen to start discussing this topic with the panelists. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Cécile, for your thoughts, and to all the other previous panelists for their first thoughts. Now let's move to the discussion, yeah, starting maybe again with Jörn, giving some food for discussion. So can you give us some additional insight where you currently are with your developments, from which launch sites you are planning to launch, with what is the launch rate you are targeting, and where you are with your reflections on regulatory approvals, licensing, and also insurance?
Sure. I can try to briefly answer on these 5 points, so that the others also have a chance to talk in the remaining minutes.
Yes, sure.
Where are we with the development? Sure. We are working on all technological elements of the launch system. We have a successful cryogen test campaign with the tank conducted, so that's operational and flight worthy. We are in the hardware in the loop testing of all avionics and electronics component of the launch vehicle. But most important, on propulsion side, we have commissioned our test site in Sweden end of last year, and are running through our main engine test campaign right now. We just communicated last week that we successfully ignited the main engine for the first time. So I think some of our advisors put it in an interesting perspective. He stated that it was the first stage combustion engine test since 1962 in Europe. Quite impressive that he is living that long to having witnessed that. I hope to see more tests on stage combustion while I'm still living. So that's actually my ambition on that end. So it's overall running quite well, targeting stage level tests by the end of year, and then moving on towards first launch by end 22, scaling the vehicle. For launch, we signed an agreement with Andrea, and that's what we also communicated in the last 2 weeks. In that sense, we secured capacity for launching from one of their pets. And in that regard, the interesting aspect is, of course, now the licensing part. Norway is underway with establishing or updating their space law, which is already existing, in respect of many of the dimensions that we have seen today. And with this agreement in place now, we will initiate the process of licensing with the authority on their end. we said we're going to give it a jump start in there and doing it pragmatically and just give it a go and start through. So we have 2 years to launch, or not even close 2 years to get to launch, and want to use the time there efficiently. For them, it will also be a first time. So happy to be the sparring partner and to learn along the way together with these guys. That's not covering all of the questions. You also asked about the launch rate. Yes, in the long run, we want to get to a weekly launch. That's what we advertise, having frequent weekly flights scheduled. We know that we need more than one launch site for that. So that's why we are, with most of the sites in Europe, having active discussions and MOUs in place, and are running through a second trade this year on where we're going to place our second launch site to cover that capacity. For the first years with Andre, we are good, but in the long run, we need at least one other launch site, which we are selecting then. In terms of insurance, you asked that as well. That's a very interesting subject. So since we have been running this activity here now since mid-2018, it was quite some interesting times in the insurance industries. If we look at the premiums that we had there being calculated in 2018 for liability and the pre-launch and launch premiums, looking at what that is today, there's a tiny little factor in between these two figures. So that was quite a steep ramp up of a lot of failures that we have seen, obviously, in the small launch industry, and the many startups that are actually coming into market there, and also some other failures on launch activities with bigger rockets. Well, okay, it is what it is. We just have to decide now what we do really for the first two flights. As long as we do that from Norway, we fly over open water. So there's no risk on casualty, at least no one who will complain, let's say it that way. And in that sense, that's a bit easier. So the liability part remains. And yeah, so we have price indications in place, and yeah, have that covered for our launch service in the future. I hope that answered all of your questions.
Yes, great, Jörn. Thanks a lot for this insight. Yeah, by the way, Norway is really also one of these examples where old laws, in fact, the very first one, if I remember well, existed. Yeah, but reform process, review process is just ongoing, and so of course, we will see what soon what the outcome and then the new framework is. This is a good handover to Stephen, Leanne. Again, thanks for the introductory slides. Well, we had already some comments from the audience, so maybe just jumping in. I think the main question was regarding small satellite constellations, what the insurance requirements will be, especially regarding the 60 million cap. Can you give some additional insight on small satellite constellations and what the approach is or will be?
So in terms of the insurance requirements under the current arrangements, so if you're operating one satellite, it would be 60 million, the single satellite. If you are operating more than one standard mission, then there is the option for the regulator to agree to a per occurrence insurance policy. And then, depending on how many you have, then there is also the option for the regulator to have an aggregate policy as well. So yes, there are some variations that can be discussed with the regulators. Obviously, it depends very much on a case-by-case basis. What the arrangements will be. One thing I didn't mention on the slide that I presented was as a result of the consultation that we issued last year, there was some feedback given to us on the in-orbit insurance and liabilities approaches, and so we've committed to carrying out a review of that over the coming months. So we'll be looking at the 60 million in light of comments that we received from stakeholders. Also looking at things like end-of-life insurance requirements as well. And also looking at, there were some alternative financial instruments that were flagged to us as well that might be were cited as potentially being able to cover off certain types of risks as well. So over the coming months, we'll be engaging with the sector once we've done a bit more preparatory work in terms of looking at those particular questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Dean. Yeah, and well, that's less a question, but it was a comment from even several participants from the audience. You mentioned that you expect a typical licensing process to take between 6 months and up to 18 months, and then not so much surprising. The comments say, well, that's quite long, especially in the new space context, and in view of the high competition and rapid developments. Some other countries, I know they have even stipulated much lower maximum durations. I think one country has established a 1 month or 6 weeks maximum duration, even in their legislation, which on the contrary is extremely ambitious, and for newer types of operators, a risky application probably. Well, let's see whether this is realistic. Can you give us some insight? What would be the criteria or circumstances to drive the duration up to a year or even longer? What could be the driving forces behind that?
Sure, I can take this one, Steve.
Yeah.
So I guess the primary one will be the complexity of the proposed activities. So something like a mega constellation is going to be vastly different from like a CubeSat, as mentioned. So that will be a driving force in terms of the complexity technically, and whether there are any other concerns involving national security, for example, or like Earth observation missions will also require consultation with the Foreign Office here and other relevant authorities. So there's a lot of different factors that can impact on it. At the moment, in terms of orbital licensing, we usually go between 6 to 12 months. So the reason that we say 18 months there is because that probably indicates that's probably more relevant to the other license types which are new from the UK, for example, launch or spaceports. So we want to have some flexibility inbuilt there so we don't give the wrong impression to applicants, so that they're aware that some of these applications might take longer. And we would strongly encourage applicants to get in touch with us before even they necessarily apply for a license, so that they can talk to the regulator and understand more about the licensing process and address their concerns before they actually do apply for the license. And in that way, hopefully it will help speed up the process once they do actually apply for a license formally. And I saw in the questions there was something specific about Starlink and mega constellations. So I can't speak to Starlink as such, but we do currently license OneWeb, and they're launching on a monthly basis now. So we're able to issue the licenses in time for them to do that. And they are current licensees. So that helps speed up the process somewhat, because we already understand the technical specifications of the mission to some extent. And we've already done a lot of that kind of assessment beforehand. So it gets easier over time when it's a repeat licensee. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Thanks, Lee. I think what you said is very important for all the existing upcoming launch service providers, operators, that, let's say, getting into contact with the regulator very early, having pre-discussions, informal preparations, already exchanging, etc., is very recommended, especially and can help to reduce then the formal licensing process. And also more and more practices foresee even such a, let's say, pre-discussion process, and if not, then nevertheless should be done. Yeah. Thanks.
Ingo as well. So if I'm just underline echo something that Akiko mentioned.
Sure.
About insurance as well, about it, being central and to be looked at early in the process. I mean, certainly. As part of the application, I think we'd be looking to see what level of engagement there has been with insurers in terms of determining whether a proposed mission, whether that be launched or otherwise, is potentially insurable. So I think, just to underline what Akiko mentioned there in terms of engaging early with insurers and regulators as well to look at the scope of the proposed mission and to be able to engage on that early, really.
Yeah. When I see, and the UK is not the only one now, increasingly, not totally, but increasingly moving to a, let's say, case by case review and decision making, which I think is good to cope with a large variance of actors and activities and individual risks and so on. So I think from that side it's good. What I always think is how does it fit with, let's say, investor discussions for the new companies, financial planning for premiums, etc., and also then and that gives again then hands over to our colleagues from the insurance side. If then the decision case by case is done rather late when the license is issued or when the decision is taken, then that would be the final moment where the actor concerned can go really to the market and say, okay, now I know what I really have to insure, and then the time needed to have the cover in place may be very short. Yeah? So the predictability and planning phase from the licensing perspective is reduced. Stephen, but also Akiko, Morten, Cécile, any thoughts on this?
Okay, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure.
I was going to say, so I'm going to talk from a third-party liability point of view here. Just to say, third-party liability policies are fairly standard policies. So, most regulators, including the UK Space Agency, are very familiar with how the policies are issued and how it works. Generally speaking, if we're talking about large geocomsats being launched on a standard heritage launch vehicle, then that is a known factor. And from memory, we have one particular UK mission where I think this was at a time where UK Space Agency was still requiring a £100 million limit. And one UK operator had a launch on an Ariane 5 where Arianespace only produced €60 million policy. And the UK Space Agency, in issuing the license, required the difference in limit coverage. And they actually came to us literally 2 days before the launch of this mission, and we were required to issue a policy. And we can do that. We can issue a policy last minute if it's a known risk profile. I think the early engagement required is very much if it's a new, operator or new technology or something different in terms of concept of technology. That is where we require more time to analyze what we are insuring. So in terms of difference in limits from third-party policy point of view, difference in limits in difference in coverage periods required are really the two differences in terms of what we issue as a policy. All other policy terms and conditions are the same across the board. And Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Akiko. I think on the point of notification of the insurance amount, I think under the process that we're putting in place, we'll be looking to engage with the applicant as early as possible before the license is issued, to give an indication in principle as to what the insurance amount would be, which would then give sufficient time for the final agreements to be put into place before the license is issued. So I think that's one way hopefully we can try and mitigate some of those issues. And I think also when it comes to things, for example, if an operator license for launch, for instance, covers a number of launches, then the regulator may enter into an agreement around the concept perhaps of what we're calling an MIR envelope, so that the range of insurance requirements will fit within a particular window, which hopefully then should be able to facilitate agreeing insurance. as part of the process as well. So I think there are a number of ways in which we can adapt to the specifics of a number of missions, and hopefully make the process smoother and easier for operators and insurers to understand what the requirements are.
And I would add to that also that actually, a lot of the information required by, I believe, this UK Space Agency and what we require will be very similar. So, and it's almost a bit of a chicken egg, because we insure subject to the licensing, but then the license is only issued subject to insurance. So the whole process, I think, should go hand in hand at any point.
And Ingo, I mean, you mentioned one of the considerations around investor confidence, etc., in investing in operations. I think one of the things that was made clear to us was around limiting liability was absolutely key to increasing investor confidence in UK launch capabilities and etc. and operations, and that's what we've done. So we said, the government made clear that we're going to be introducing limits for operator liability and licenses. So again, that's a key indicator for investors as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, Tony just contacts via the chat and would like also to make a comment on the license duration and his own experiences. Tony, welcome to our session.
Thank you. Can you see me?
Yes, absolutely.
Hello. Yeah, interesting session. Just to provide a couple of information, and I have the privilege actually to be hosting the conference. I can speak in effect. I want to provide some advice to those companies which have commented on the 6 to 18 months requirement to actually negotiate and discuss the license requirements. With the UK especially, I actually negotiated the OneWeb license requirements starting from 2015. Basically, at that time we were supposed to launch at the end of 2017. And then we launched instead the beginning of 2018. I can't provide any details, unfortunately, but at least I would have to say that for those companies that want to launch large constellations or constellations in general, in effect, which are new and they provide maybe even new launchers, basically, I advise that you actually start as soon as possible. And of course, as many of you will know ahead of time the size of your constellation, the risks, the launchers which you want to use for launching your satellites, for example, especially these broadband medium-sized satellites or small satellites like OneWeb, for example, or Iridium or whoever it is. And that was an issue in the sense that there was no experience from the UK Space Agency to deal with a large constellation like OneWeb before that. There was O3b, but O3b was only 10 satellites, and they were insured individually. But with a constellation of what's called mega constellations, the UK Space Agency had to get some experience and understanding the risks, basically. So thankfully, it took us nearly 18 months to negotiate the insurance requirements for OneWeb, and then it was just after that getting the license. And of course, as many of the other regulators, license don't come quickly; they come at the last minute, often 1 week or 1 month, sometimes, or maybe 1 week before the launch, and that is actually normal and normal to be expected. So there is no need for bosses and management to push the agency through political means, for example, to push them to get it 1 year before or 6 months before, because they need to understand the risk, and it is a risky business, I have to say. So that's my advice for constellation companies: is start early, start as soon as possible to get your license from the space agencies, because it's not just the insurance requirements, it's also the risk of launch. You may not even get a license at all if it's extremely risky. So your business may suffer from this, actually. I'll stop at that. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I just pitch in there? Thanks for saying that, Tony. And I completely agree about the more complex your mission, particularly mega constellations. The earlier we would advise you to come talk to us informally. That's completely fine. We do that all the time. And also just to emphasize that the UK regulators' role is primarily to ensure safety. So that is going to add some time in terms of licensing applications versus, I don't know, the weeks that you mentioned before, Ingo. Some jurisdictions might be saying we have a full suite of legislation that is designed to ensure that we make sure that all activities carried out that we license are done so as safe as possible. And so that's our primary concern, and that is how we do our licensing.
Yeah, unfortunately, Tony, we are already moving towards the end of our panel. But just before we conclude, Morten and Cécile, would you like also to give some key recommendations to new operators, startups, how to approach you, how to approach the insurance topics and the market? What best advice to be observed? Morten.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a startup, you have lots of things on your plate. You're hopefully innovating, you're selling into a market as a first come to market, you have new technology, you have a lot on your plate. Risk management doesn't necessarily specifically pop up as something you think you need to look at, although most people do it as part of their normal business. And I think most engineers especially are automatically very good risk managers. But it does merit to get some advice. You can contact insurers directly. Google searches will bring up space insurers. You can contact space brokers. Brokers will also help you out, and they will know the insurance market, and they are meant to be acting on your behalf. So you may feel more comfortable talking to insurance brokers. But most importantly, just do it yourself, because you know your projects best, you know your products best, you know your risks best. And don't be, say, if you, by all means, you should go and talk to an expert, but you should have done your homework before that. And most people do. Like I said, engineers and startups are very bright people. They know what they do. Give it some thought and don't end up being the last one to come running to the insurance market. As Akiko said, we can issue a policy tomorrow for a standard product. Very easy. But it may not be what you want, and you may have to pay more for it than you wanted to, because you will not have the choice that you could otherwise have. But come and talk to us. We're friendly guys. We normally like space. That's why we're doing it. We often have a space background. We're fascinated by new projects, and yeah, we'll be very happy to try to help you.
Okay, Morten, thanks. Cécile, unfortunately, we have to stop now and hand over to the next session. I'm very sorry, but Tony is already in and then pushing us. And I think
we have finished the time now. We have finished the time, so please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you all for this great panel, for good discussion. I think we provide a lot of insights to the audience, and yeah, now next coming session on finance should be equally interesting, Tony.
To the next panel, can you please raise your hand, and I will now do some admin to put you into the panel. Thank you to the existing panel. Thank you very much. You had a great hour and a quarter to develop your thoughts and your panel. Excellent. I loved it, and we could have more of this soon through a roundtable discussion if you wish. Ingo, for you to prepare it.
Absolutely, with pleasure, Tony. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Conference. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.